Good afternoon, everyone. I am Kara Hart from the Capital Region Education Council. I represent Connecticut in the Association of Educational Purchasing Agencies, which is a purchasing cooperative with 30 member states represented, each represented by an educational service agency. We do bidding together on behalf of all the schools in those states, and we make our contracts available to every state in the United States. So we have everything from school supplies to plumbing to turf and tracks and mobile connectivity, which you're going to hear about from today. So we are recording this session. If you have questions, we're going to leave time at the end for Q&A, but if you have a burning question, you can hit the raise hand button or just throw your question in the chat and we'll get to those at the end of the session. And our speaker today is Matt Regal. He's the Director of Solutions Engineering for Kajeet, and I'm going to pass it over to him.
Yep. Thanks, Kara. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for attending. We certainly appreciate your time today. We got some good information for you we're going to share, and you can see a quick agenda here. We'll walk through, how to handle, emergency preparedness, what drives it, what we've seen, what we can do from a day-to-day purpose, in terms of dedicated failover as well as temporary connectivity as well. Then we'll show you some helpful resources and certainly some Q&A at the end. If you do happen to have questions throughout, feel free to chime in, raise your hand or put it in the chat and we can address them there as well too. So hopefully you're familiar with Kajeet. For those of you that might not be, we've been around for a while. We celebrated our 20th anniversary last year. So we're headquartered in McLean, Virginia. And the main gist of what we do is student connectivity, right? And so Sentinel, for those of you that might not be familiar with it, that's our private network that we built from scratch. That's where we handle all the filtering, SIPA compliance, everything that you would think of you would need from a student data perspective in terms of making sure they're safe and connected and getting done what they need to get done school-wise, right? In terms of that, we've got over 6 million active lines, and we do have presence in 173 countries. So we have another division that's an enterprise division that focuses more on that. And we do have 43 different patents on the way that we manage and shape that data traffic in Sentinel. You can see the timeline here below showing how we've evolved over the years. But the most important thing recently has been E-rate. So last year alone, 2 out of every 3 buses that was on E-rate went with Kajeet. And that's our all-in-one package with Sentinel, the data plan, the filtering, and the equipment. We were successful in getting in 2 out of every 3 of those buses. So certainly something we can excel at if that's something you might have an interest in as well. So in terms of what we do, I mentioned, Sentinel is the heart of everything we do. We have a couple different areas. So most of you are probably familiar with student access. That's the hotspots, the Chromebooks, the typical one-to-one student devices that you're going to take home. Almost everybody's familiar with that. We also have the ability to provide connectivity on the buses, as I just mentioned. So that's been around for a while, and those are available for every bus, or we can do portable kits. You can move them back and forth between buses. We'll also talk today about Kajeet Connect, and what Connect is, that's your either dedicated connectivity for a campus or backup or failover that we'll discuss. And then we also have private wireless, which is a different group we have that if you're into CBRS or private LTE, if you have any sort of projects or fundings like that, we have a whole team dedicated to there as well. And the great thing about this is whether you have one of these, you have all of these, you're always going to have Sentinel, right? So if you start with one and you add in Smart Bus or you add in Connect, it's all going to be the same Sentinel. It's just one dashboard, very easy to manage and see what your devices are doing. So in terms of the unexpected, right? It happens, right? We've seen this year. I happen to be in North Carolina, so we get hurricanes pretty regular. This year, we got one far worse than usual in the western part of the state. But so depending where you are, it could be hurricanes, could be tornadoes, could be snow. We also have power outages. What's interesting with the power outages is they tend to be either one of two things, either, new construction, right? Maybe a line got cut, or they could be related to the natural disasters as well, right? And then, of course, you've got your campus emergencies, which unfortunately becoming all too more common these days, but definitely something that needs to be dealt with, right? And so we'll discuss today how we can react to each one of these and make sure you have what you need to make sure you stay connected. So in terms of some quick numbers, you can see here this first bullet point about 92% of public schools report that they update their emergency operations plan annually or more frequently, right? That's a really good stat, right? And that hopefully that's the case. The one thing I will add to this, if this is something you do or you work with the people who do this, it's great that you update the plan, but also be sure and practice the plan. At least once a year, run through it, make sure that everyone's comfortable or those that are involved in what they're doing. Not only from, because you certainly don't want to do something the first time under a stressful situation, but some of these solutions are battery powered. So you want to make sure you've got those batteries charged up, right? It's a great package, but if you don't have any power, not going to do you a whole lot of good. So something to keep in mind there. And we've learned that from customers as well. Unfortunately, gun related incidents are more and more prevalent every year. And what we've seen, from those incidents from the next couple bullet points here is, how do you handle that? Does the school get evacuated? Do you need connectivity away from campus? So we'll talk about, at a reconvene point, maybe a block or so away, how you can reestablish communications there. Are there other tools that would be possible to help you manage that? Take attendance, count for everyone, make sure you've got a full head count, right? And then the last one here, just talking about, presidential declared national emergencies, right? Major disasters are becoming more frequently, whether it's climate change, whatever it happens to be, there's a lot of them, right? And one thing we've seen with the schools, and we'll talk about this, is outside of schools, the education part, a lot of the schools are used as secondary shelters, right? Or even primary shelters, for evacuations, for natural disasters. And so how do you make sure you've got resources in place to make sure that you've got those people who are there to stay connected, make sure their loved ones know, where they are and that they're safe. So in terms of use cases, we'll touch on this one first. I just mentioned hurricanes and evacuation shelters. So um, I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina, so I'm about in the middle of the state. Our first experience with this here was down the coast. We have some school districts on the coast where they use the portable kits, which I'll show you later. They use the portable kits on buses so they can move it around from bus to bus. But what they do with those also is when they're not being used. So when the primary facilities, as we mentioned, like your schools are going to have Wi-Fi generally. You might have to augment a little bit, but your secondary shelters, maybe a church or a YMCA or those facilities that are secondary shelters, might not have Wi-Fi. So what the schools do then is they lend out these portable bus kits to those shelters, so they've got connectivity, and that connectivity is the safe, filter, SIPA compliant, so that the evacuees can get online and do what they need to do, communicate, but they're not watching Netflix, they're not on Facebook, they're not, looking at Hulu. So it's truly communication, not so much entertainment, which also helps keep your costs down, right? So that's one use case. Campus emergencies, I said that's going to vary. We were just talking before about brush fires. That's getting to be a bigger thing these days. The schools having to evacuate because of brush fires, and sometimes those emergencies, you have lead time to get ready and plan for them. Sometimes they happen very suddenly and you don't have time. And so we'll talk about the portable kits we have that you can manage that. Maybe it's as simple as there's just a fire alarm, right? And everyone needs to get out of the building, but you need to account for everyone, right? So we have tools that we can work with that. Um, and then, augment or enhancing existing campus. We did quite a bit of this during COVID. As with a lot of things, we all learned quite a bit during COVID. And one of the things we learned was, most schools have pretty good internet, but they don't have it everywhere, right? And so we worked with a lot of campuses where we would augment their existing network. So maybe they didn't have Wi-Fi in the cafeteria or they didn't have it in the auditorium, right? We had a couple school districts in Florida where they put big party tents out on the football field with picnic tables so the kids could do their homework out there. And so we provided connectivity in those locations, through a series of devices that would be able to let them do whatever they needed to do, at a safe distance, right? And so there are other things, can be done, obviously, besides the non-COVID situations, which we'll discuss too. And then, events away from campus, whether it's athletic events, whether it's field trips, anything that's tied to school where you need connectivity. One of the things we see that's very common is using these portable kits for athletic events. So they will use them for Wi-Fi on the bus as they're going to their event, and then they'll take the kit in with them to the visitor locker room for visitor, for Wi-Fi, or maybe they take it up to the press box and then they live stream the event. That's one example. We had another case where, they're used on field trips a lot. We in North Carolina, we've got a lot of ecological preserves and outdoor areas where students will go. And that's a standard use case that we're aware of. But one of the great things that I love about Kajeet is our customers come up with ways to use these that we never even thought of. So I heard from one customer where the teacher was going on a field trip, and in addition to that, they had planned to do, she also was using the device on the bus and had loaded up videos related to the subject of where they were going to. So, two things. One, she was, keeping the students, educated and engaged on the way there, which was great. She was making more use of the classroom time. And two, the side benefit for the teacher and the driver, the kids were focused, right? They weren't bored, they weren't getting excited, they weren't screaming. So there's a nice side benefit to there too as well. So any questions on customer use cases so far? Nope. Okay. All right. So I mentioned Sentinel, right? So Sentinel, as I mentioned, is the core of everything we do. The thing that most people are familiar with is filtering, what we allow and what we don't allow, right? And I love this slide because it's very simple. You can see on the left, we're going to allow things that are education related, whether it's Canvas, Khan Academy, G Suite for education. Those things we're going to allow. The things we don't allow are things that are not education related. So, TikTok, Hulu, Netflix, Snapchat, certainly not education related, right? One caveat I'll make, you see, we do have YouTube on here. We block YouTube by default, but if you have someone who wanted to use YouTube, and specifically YouTube for education, we can allow that. You'd have to ask us for it. We would just simply toggle that and make sure it's on, because we do realize there is quite a bit of content on YouTube for education that's beneficial for everyone. So, and these lists are not hard and fast. I mean, we have some templates set up that we use. Basically, is a K through 8, there's a 9 through 12, and then there's an adult teacher staff filter. One of the things we find when we do new deployments is there's always going to be a learning curve, about a 2 to 3 week time frame where there's going to be a new teacher who's using a site that we weren't aware of that needs to be on the allowed list, right? And we could certainly do that. So that's just said about 2 to 3 weeks to kind of get that leveled out at the semester to get everything going. And then the beauty of this is it's all hands-free wireless, so we could change those at any time. So another example is I mentioned field trips. Let's say you've got a really long field trip, right? And let's say that the teachers wanted to allow the kids to watch some videos just to keep their own sanity. We can temporarily allow them to watch videos if you like, just for that 1 hour, you're there and back. And then we can very quickly, disable that and send it back the way it needs to. So very customizable, easy to do, something we can manage for you. So when it comes to outages, right? So this is a basic hub and spoke outage, obviously an old legacy network, but really the point I want to convey here is, there are still in some districts some old legacy systems where if the school loses internet, you're going to be down quite a bit, right? And so what we can do here is put one of our devices in the as a backup, and that provides you your internet connectivity, whatever it needs to be, right? And so now, obviously, in this scenario, ideally, you would have one of these at every single school, right? We would love that. We would love to sell you one, but we also realize that, school, funds are not unlimited, right? So what a lot of times we'll do is we'll work with the school districts, right? And say, okay, what areas are you more prone to having these outages? And put one of these in each one of those schools, but then keep a pool of them. So if you're if the district's drivable and you can be somewhere within 20, 30 minutes or so, keep a pool of them at the central office and take them out there as needed, right? Like I said, we'd certainly love to sell you one for each school, but we realize that's not always capable or possible. So having the pooled resources will still get you that connectivity and allow you to get it within a reasonable time. So what exactly does that do, right? So when it comes to Connect Suite, we have two flavors of it. So we have the smart failover, which is your backup connectivity, which is your standard LTE or 5G um, that kicks in once your internet goes down, right? Or we have Prime, which is the exact same service. It's just a matter of this one. The Prime is used full time, where the failover is only used when a network goes down, right? We have quite a few schools that use us as their primary internet. A lot of these might be new schools where they aren't going to get fiber for 6 months or maybe a semester or so, or this is a lot in like smaller locations. Like if you've got an off-campus retreat center where it doesn't really make sense to have, a full-time wired connection from the landline provider, but it's much more affordable to have it, as an LTE connection. We could certainly do that, right? And some of the features here, we do work with all the major carriers here in the U.S. So we have AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon, and U.S. Cellular. Um, I mentioned the cloud platform, how we manage it all through centrally through the dashboard. I talked briefly about security, but let me build on that a little bit because this comes into play much more so here because you're talking about network access, right? So obviously, your own campus network, you've got a firewall, you've got your threat detection and malware in place. What we do is we're set up that we have that in place on ours, which I'll show you on the next slide. But we manage all that for you from our side. So the minute it fails over, that is in place. A few years ago, when we first started selling this, there were some schools that dealt with failover, but hadn't considered the filtering and the security aspect of it. And so that was something they were relieved to see that we actually did that, included with all of the rate plans, right? We've talked about the filtering a little bit. One thing I will touch on also is the rollover of your data. So with Kajeet, your data never expires. So it's not a use it or lose it solution. A lot of the smart spots now, the hotspots are unlimited, but on the data plan, we have a lot of schools that start with, say, a 5 GB plan, right? And say for 12 months, that gives you 60 gigabytes. And we can allow you can use that anytime you want, right? So it's great as an insurance policy in that, you've got 60 gigabytes you can use on day one, you can use it on day 364 or somewhere in between. And it also pools across. Right. So we're very aware of, budgets and how you need to be frugal with your money. And so that's some of the benefits we add in to help you take care of that. And if that's something you're interested in, we can certainly talk more about that as well. So let's talk about the failover piece of it right here. So this is a little more detailed diagram. And what we do is I mentioned it's the 4G or the 5G and LTE connection. We're basically set up as secondary WAN. So when your primary internet goes down, we pick up and just it's seamless, right? And so with that, when I say seamless, um, our testing on this has shown, and this is I did internally, and then also sent one to a customer, and they deployed it in their environment. It will pick up. So when your primary internet goes down, we see an average failover in 6 milliseconds, what it'll pick up, right? So almost instantaneous. Likewise, when it fails back, when your primary comes back online, that's 36 milliseconds. So barely a blip on the radar, right? And so very, very easy. Like I said, you set it up once and it's good to go. One thing we used to focus on a lot more was what you're doing, right? And this was before 5G. Obviously, with 5G, it's a much bigger pipe and you can do more. But a lot of schools still go with 4G depending on what your needs are, right? And so we would always look at it's okay, what is it you need to have when you're running on that backup connection? Because it's not going to be a full fiber connection if it's LTE. And, do you want to have your phones running? Do you want to have email? Do you need internet access? Point of sale is another one. The cafeterias are there. Um, Phones is always first. And the reason for that is, obviously, if there's an incident at school, the last thing you want is, parents calling, but they're parents and they're going to call. That's normal. If they call and they get no answer, then they're going to show up, right? So now you're just compounding that problem, right? One thing I'll add to this list that I learned from a customer through failure, they had a backup issue, and that's why they came to us, was um, payroll. They had an outage at their data processing center, and no one was able to get paid. They couldn't process payroll, which was not something I would normally think of, but certainly computer reliant. And I was like, oh man, that's a big factor, right? So you can see here, these are just some snapshots of what we've seen, but obviously there's a limitless number of use cases for that. So that's the failover piece. Then here we talk about the portable kits, right? So when you go with the portable kits, now we're looking at, okay, these can be used on campus, they can be used off campus, and it really depends what your use case is. So when I mentioned those kits that we're using on the bus, that's these here. And this is what we use in the evacuation shelters. And this, if you've never seen one, this is what's called a Pelican case. So it's a good heavy duty case. And this one, it's about the size of a lunchbox. It's not very big at all. But we include AC charger as well as a DC charger, and we can get batteries for these too if you'd like. So that was something else we did during COVID. So that thing is fully independent, fully supportable wherever you want to put it. Right? Then we also have what more people are familiar with is just the hotspots, the smart spots. And these, usually we do them a bundle of 5 or 6. And like I said, this once again, this is battery powered, so you got to make sure it's charged up. If you need to have a couple people online at the same time in different locations. This obviously would be one location, so you're talking, 150 to 350 feet of Wi-Fi range. Whereas this one, you could split these up wherever you need to, right? And that, could be different parts of the parking lot, could be different locations, whatever it happens to be. But that's something most people are familiar with there. So let me pause here for a second because this is a really important point. Any comments or questions on these at all? Nope. Okay. All right. And so and we can mix and match these too, right? There's no hard and fast. So if you want to do a couple of these, we can certainly do that. Whatever works best for what your needs are. So that was the main thing I had presentation wise. Let me pause here and Carol, do we have anything pop up in the Q&A at all?
Let's see. How can smaller districts with limited budgets prioritize these tools effectively?
How are smaller districts prioritizing is the question?
Smaller districts with limited budgets,
Okay.
how can
Yep.
they prioritize these kind of tools effectively?
Yes, so that actually gets back to a couple things. So the first point I made about, being able to decide what schools you want. We'll use the network example. So on the failover part, that's one example that we've learned from customers is, yes, we realize you can't buy one of these for every single school. So have the ability to have a pool of them centrally located and move them around. That's been one use case for the backup, the permanent backup. And then on the use case for the last slide I showed you on the smart spots or the portable bus kits, once again, just a mix and match, right? You could start with as few as one if you want, and then build from there. And like I said, they can be on any carrier, any location, however they want to do it. So certainly flexible and could give you many, many more examples on that if they're interested. So.
What are some of the most common mistakes that districts make in emergency planning and how could they avoid them?
Well, the first one I mentioned is practicing that plan, right? And so I'm a veteran. I was in the Coast Guard for 5 years, so that this has been drilled into my head is that it's great that you have a plan, but you need to practice your plan, right? But you have to balance that, as I mentioned earlier on that first slide, with time, right? Everybody only has so much time, and that time needs to be focused on students. So making sure that that plan, one, is everyone familiar with the plan, or who needs to be familiar with the plan is familiar with it. Did you write it? Did the person who was here 2, 3 years ago write it? Is it even still applicable? Right? That's the most common one. And then second one is, power, right? Are those things charged up if they need to be charged so that they can be used? Because the big thing there is, you want everything to be flawless, because when you go to use these, it's not going to be an ideal time, right? It's going to be a stressful situation. So having that pre-planned, pre-staged, and ready to go will certainly help to make that as less stressful as it can be. So.
How quickly can the portable connectivity kits be deployed when there is an emergency, and what type of training is needed for staff?
They can be deployed instantly. I mean, as long as it takes you to turn it on. So I mean, a smart spot, you're looking at a minute, maybe, if that, right? To get it, once you get it in your hands to turn it on. The portable bus kit, a little bit longer. It just takes a little bit longer to boot up, a couple minutes, but that one will, then you'll have the Wi-Fi, the SSID and password there. But I mean, in terms of, getting them on and up is fairly quick. The bigger thing that we've seen from talking to customers is where is your assembly point? Where are the students going to go? Do they know where they need to go? Does the principal or the safety director, whoever it needs to be, do they have these tools, right? So a lot of times it might be the director of security that keeps these in his car, right? And so, which actually that just made me think of something else. So the schools will have their own, but then there's oftentimes other organizations like security that will have a pool of these as well. So the school can at least get started, deploy what they have, and then as the additional school resources come in, they can then help and assist with that too. So.
Are there any best practices you would share for ensuring that the Wi-Fi hotspots remain functional and effective if there's a large scale emergency?
Um, it depends. I mean, the biggest thing I would say is it is when you're deploying multiple hotspots, you have to be careful about them overlapping, right? So because the range on those is about 100 feet or so, maybe 50 feet, depending on where you are, is making sure that try to keep them from overlapping and make sure that you log on to the closest one. So we have seen scenarios where you've got four of them right next to each other, nobody knows which one is what, and everybody logs on, and then you move them to different locations, and you might be 5 feet from one, but you're logged onto the one that's 30 feet the other direction, so your signal quality might not be as good there. So those are more logistical things, and that's things that when we have done these deployments with customers, these are all things we share with them, as say, hey, here's some things you need to keep in mind, here's what we've learned, here's what you want to consider when you're doing these type deployments.
What are some of the challenges that districts might face when setting up hardwired failover networks, and how can they be addressed?
For hardwired, the biggest thing, it depends. The biggest thing we've seen recently is 5G penetration in a building. So if you want 5G, we definitely would need to get an antenna outside. So that would need to be a permanent mount solution, because 5G operates at a much higher frequency than LTE does, so it doesn't penetrate the buildings as well. That's been the biggest issue we have. And then having the available IT staff in place to set it up. One thing I would highly recommend, especially when it comes to anything that's going to touch your network, get the IT staff involved as soon as possible. The last thing we want to do, and it does happen, I get it, is a different department will purchase these things, and then it gets dumped in the IT department's lap and says, hey, go deploy this. And then IT's not happy, right? And we all know that when IT's not happy, nobody's happy. And so making sure that we have the involvement from them, in engagement from them, make sure they're involved, make sure that they know what's coming, because it actually will help them. It will make their job easier. But doing that proactively versus reactively makes a huge difference, because if they want to, they can drag their feet, and they can make it very cumbersome in time consuming to get something like this in place. So.
Are there any other questions out there? Well, if you think of any after this, feel free to reach out to your AEPA representative or to Kajeet. If you're talking to Kajeet, be sure to mention AEPA. We are holding these webinars monthly. We're going to skip December. In January, we'll be featuring WTI Tremco, which is our roofing and building envelope vendor partner. So look for details on that. And thank you for participating today.
Yep. Thanks everyone for your time. And you can see here, you guys will make these slides available. We've got a couple QR codes here to these flyers. If you do want to have some additional info, and feel free to reach out to the AEPA team, and we'll be happy to provide more info if you need. So,
And thank you very much, Matt, for joining us today and providing us with this information. It was great.
you're welcome. Everybody have a great day.
You too.